A hot potato. Psychic Peace Circle Berlin, MFK. Santiner, Ufology. Psychoscientific Frontiers. Selected publications from a variety of subjects of psychoscientific research. Editor, Rolf Linnemann, Certificated Engineer. Internet, http://www.psychowissenschaften.de. Translator, John Com, Buterim. Protocol of Extraterrestrial Contact from the year 1970. Title, A Hot Potato. Questioners, Medialer Friedenskreis Berlin, Psychic Peace Circle, Berlin. Mediums, Uwe Speer, 17, and Monica Manuela Speer, 15. Santiner, The World Teacher Ashtar Sheran. Preface by the publisher. On the 8th of October 1995, a few days after his interview with the Western publication UFO News, Alexej Solotov, one of Russia's leading UFO researchers, was stabbed to death in front of his house in Tver. The name of Alexej Solotov is associated with a whole epoch of UFO research in Russia. Solotov said amongst other things in an interview shortly before his death, "I have been dealing with these incomprehensible, anomalous phenomena for more than half my life. Thousands of people in Russia have seen UFOs flying about. About 1,000 people in our land have observed actual UFO landings, and about 300 people have observed extraterrestrial beings or had contact with them. I myself have seen flying UFOs 3 times, I have investigated 3 landing sites, and I once saw a living humanoid. We didn't actually talk to one another, we only exchanged glances, but I still see his face clearly before me. His gaze was imperturbable and penetrating. When our gazes met, I began to realize that I was not looking at a human being from Earth. We looked at each other for about 10 seconds before I ran away. When I did return, he had gone. There is sufficient empirical and scientific evidence available that can be analyzed in laboratories. Our laboratories and also many other institutes in Russia analyze samples from various landing sites, and they ascertained that the frequencies of quartz and crystal generators changes, the tension of springs also changes. This means that UFOs have left a trace of a certain type of radiation at these sites, which influences the physical properties of physical objects and substances. 2. The temporal infinity of space creates a situation where civilizations in other regions of space didn't emerge at the same time. Some are within the first stadium of their development, whilst others have already reached the zenith or are about to move to another stage of their development. This is why various civilizations find themselves at various levels of development. We don't visit them, they visit us, so they therefore must be more advanced. They do not meddle in our affairs, because they do not want to disturb the natural development of our human civilization. They might only interfere in extremely critical moments, when the Earth is faced with total destruction, for instance, in order to save this human civilization. Every new energy source, like for instance steam, electricity, or nuclear power, results in gigantic progress. It would constitute direct interference, if they would therefore provide us with a new energy source. We might not be mature enough anyway. We are still very aggressive, we go to war against one another. Could they envisage just where new energy sources would take us? Mankind has always utilized any new scientific innovations for military purposes. However, when a civilization has reached such a high technical standard, it must also have the same eminent psychological and ethnical standard. They did not fly all the way to visit planet Earth for no apparent reason. By observing Earth and its levels of development, they gain the opportunity to foresee the future. To recognize the mechanics and the legalities of the terrestrial evolutionary process. Contact with extraterrestrial would undoubtedly be a great advantage for mankind. Had they intended to harm us, they would have done so long ago. They have been observing us for thousands of years. 1. Can track this fact throughout the whole period of human history. The Bible, Ezekiel, also describes a UFO in detail, and this is something that can't be denied. If they would deem it necessary to interfere, they would certainly do so, and the human civilization would benefit greatly if this was the case. Let's take the preservation of the ozone layers as an example. This is presently a question of life and death for the whole planet. However, as we mentioned before, due to human aggressiveness, this is presently out of the question. In various research centers dealing with biomasses, abnormal phenomena, genetic research, and astrology, experimental results indicate that a cosmic consciousness exists within space from whence we receive information on an intuitive level. These are not mere words, because there are research results and scientific evidence to support this statement. Based on these results, I can definitely and convincingly talk about this. Esoteric knowledge has come to us through the vehicle of faith. One can believe in this or not. But now has come a moment in time where we have to know just what is true and what is not. It is of decisive importance. Bad Salzuflen, April 2000. Preface, by Herbert Victor Speer, leader of the Medialen Friedenskreises Berlin. The truth is like a hot potato. Not something one likes to touch upon. It should, however, show the courage here, so that one can believe in it. There are people who experience things that are so unique, that they are afraid that nobody will understand what they mean. They know that those that never experienced the like would like to have them certified. These people are actually in great danger, namely to be declared 3. schizophrenic by medical experts to then end up in mental institutions. However, such attitudes in regards to the occult do not hinder progress. The English bard Shakespeare said, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." He was quite correct, because when school wisdom does not experience something like that, it lacks direct experience and can therefore not comprehend something as extraordinary as this. Man's perceptive capabilities can be expanded into superlativeness. There are actually no boundaries in sight. This fact is verified by hallucinations and hypnotic suggestions. What you find written down in this protocol is based on the truth and on self-experience. It is no religious gobbledygook and also no treatise. The Holy Scriptures, the Bible, is supposed to be the book of all books, but one has come to the conclusion in the mean time that aberrations also run riot in that particular book. The truth awaits its discovery and its publication. Man does not just live on one planet, but within an infinite universe that accommodates planet Earth. Man's existence is therefore not limited to planet Earth, but represents an intelligent part of the universe. People who come to us in flying saucers bring us knowledge about life in other solar systems. Flying saucers is such a horrible term for the most bodacious flying objects man could ever encounter. There is something about these flying objects, they are so fast and agile, so occult and fantastic, that one considers them more of an illusion than anything else. They are at least as real as our own spacecraft. When one asks one's fellow citizens whether they have any knowledge about them, one's question is not taken serious, because the world's press has done just enough damage by supporting ignorance and rejection with all possible means. The whole world suffers from unbearable stress, because the destruction of the world could be just around the corner. Man has learned nothing from all the wars of the past, at least nothing that could act as a deterrent or do something for peace and understanding amongst nations. Our weaponry is everywhere and it is abominable. Is there a force, a power in this world that is more dreadful than the force of atom bombs, which have such a gigantic effect? Man might know his planets, but he does not know the universe and its mysteries. He isn't even aware of the laws that govern the universe. Mankind's knowledge is akin to an iceberg. The 1/8 that rises above the surface symbolizes mankind's knowledge, whilst 7/8 of colossal knowledge still lies under the surface. The psychoscientific research community of Berlin, with its psychic work circle, is not interested in publishing a fictional account out of commercial interests. It is only interested in 4. Looking for and announcing the objective truth. This objective truth is a hot potato, because certain sections of most governments are under the influence of enormous negative powers, so that all objective truth is attacked, discriminated against and malevolently persecuted, even if this truth is of divine origin. Our contact with extraterrestrial human beings was established about 15 years ago. We have constantly reported about this during this time. We have published everything these extraterrestrials had to tell us, and most of it has been translated into all the major languages. The introduction of this knowledge into scientific and intellectual circles is unmistakable, and it must eventually change our situation. But he who has no knowledge about occult or psychic contacts should not waste a lot of time mulling over this, but simply acknowledge the fact that these lines do stem from a most eminent intelligence. We are absolutely proud of the fact that we have been able to maintain contact with this intelligence for years, and we try to do the best we can. These saucers, let's call them UFOs, are visible evidence that an even higher authority stands and keeps vigil over the people on Earth. We are certainly not completely at the mercy of hell. The entire range of Ashtar Sheran's German brochures is completely out of print. They are evidence given in a beseeching way the like has not been seen since the Sermon on the Mount. This merciless criticism of the people on Earth is not supported by any external means. We are aware how difficult our own campaign is, but we do not allow ourselves to be discouraged. The mission is beyond all religious denominations, that is to say, it is a mission in its own rights. Ashtar Sheran's words have become more forceful and more to the point over the years. It is a repeat of an account in the Bible, when the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were warned by Lot on behalf of extraterrestrials, but still decided to ridicule him. Ashtar Sheran appears to us like a Messiah, like a bringer of light and a redeemer. We ask ourselves whether a Messiah must actually come to us in terrestrial form? Our answer to this is, a Messiah can come to us any way he likes. The emphasis must be on his absolute connectivity with God, in his paramount knowledge, in his ingenious common sense, in his convincing love for mankind. All of these characteristics are to be found in Ashtar Sheran, whose unusual name has become something of a legend. Let us allow him to speak. 5. Irrationality. May peace be with you. May peace reign across all frontiers. I have once again prepared an important message for you. However, before I begin, I would like to draw your attention to something, this message is so enormously important that every word is of absolute importance. I must therefore decide on how to express myself. How should I bring this message to you? I can express myself in the language of pundits. I can, however, also apply a theological indignation. 1. But I can also ramble on enough to fill a book and to give the impression that one deals with absolute scholarliness here, but in the final analyses you will end up knowing less than before. I have to make a decision. If I was endowed with God's voice, I would unleash a barrage of words. I will therefore lower my aims and utilize very simple terminologies, because I believe that it is necessary to express myself in such a way that the majority of mankind can best understand me. There are expressions that are not particularly delicate, but they cannot be replaced by any other word due to their connotation. I will begin by dealing with irrationality, because things take place here on Terra that cannot be comprehended by either human rationality, or with common sense. We respected this humanity and we regarded them as developable. We are confronted with the fact these days that we do not understand ourselves anymore, because we take an interest in you that you do not deserve. What we do, namely to fulfill a divine mission, we mainly do for God. The technological advances made on Terra are unmistakable. The scientific arena also achieved a lot. An enormous change has taken place over the last 100 years. You are aware of this and you are proud of this fact. We respectfully acknowledge all of this, but the overall situation is indescribably negative just the same. Mankind has up to now not realized just why it actually lives here on this planet. Every human being lives on this planet not just from the day of their birth until the hour of their demise, but since the terrestrial existence of this mankind, and this in a constant cycle of return. There is, however, a good reason for man to suffer the loss of his past memories in the process and to only detain an intuitive awareness. You live on a planet that has been selected to perform the role of a redeeming planet right from the very beginning of its development. This planet Earth had and still has all the requirements to provide this redemption. 1. Indignation, righteous anger. 6. You could have made good use of them. Man on Earth is, however, more unreasonable than one would assume when taking his technological acquisitions and his ambitions into consideration. His terrible ignorance in regards to esoteric insights is incredible and downright irrational. Governing authorities are of the opinion that it is immaterial whether their citizens can make the right decisions in regards to what takes place here on Earth. It apparently suffices when citizens approve the measures taken by their party or by the government. This is a deplorable situation. Something that does not exist here where we are. The individual citizen must be informed so that he gains a clear picture about man's existence and aims. There is not one government on this planet that could answer this question, because they don't know the answer. All governments are of the opinion that they are actually responsible for the advancement of this world, but that this responsibility expires with the death of every individual human being. Once you're dead, your responsibilities cease. This is an aberration that will come back to haunt you, because constant training can damage man's mind. This results in a retrogressive mental step. For the people on Earth, there are innumerable numbers of technically and scientifically trained people one regards as highly intelligent. But most of them are complete failures in spite of this, because they lack the knowledge to correctly control their thought processes. The general progress in all areas of daily life has naturally strengthened the judgmental abilities and the intellectual capacity of people. False religious or traditional beliefs are perceived as bogus. Nowadays, we could not have impressed you with the truth 5,000 years ago, not even 100 years ago. If there was no God in charge of the universe, such a God would have to be invented, otherwise you would fall victim to destruction. You cannot see what it means for you that we take an interest in you at this point in time. Those that regard our messages as pure fantasy have never contemplated what the truth is all about. They are unconcerned about it. What do you need divine laws for, if they are only regarded as man-made regulations? But God's laws are not just authoritative in regards to this earth. The damage theology has done with the nonsense they spread is incredible, something you are unable to fathom. Certain concepts in regards to the creative spirit are examples of utter blasphemy. The interpretations of inexplicable phenomena and events recorded in the Bible can be regarded an affront in regards to man's common sense. They are irrational. The beginning to the betterment of this world is already a given. Landing on the moon provided all the prerequisites for a better understanding of abstract concepts. We are now able to talk to you differently from the way we talked to you hundreds or thousands of years ago. 7. I maintain that almost all evils on this terra are the result of completely false religious concepts. Even if there are people on earth who completely distance themselves from any religion, they are still affected by the delirious behaviorism of the fellow men. Not one human race throughout the universe is capable of developing in a positive way, if it wants to exist without the consciousness and without the certainty a living creator provides. Every human being requires positive guidance and indoctrination. Every human being requires an archetype. But atheistic tendencies lead you gradually into an abyss, that is to say, into a situation nobody can correctly interpret in a lifetime. I have repeatedly drawn your attention to just how important higher knowledge really is. Even if God is irrational, this doesn't mean that He does not exist. One cannot simply deny the existence of something because it is incomprehensible to the human mind. You, however, practice this nonsense. Your scientists already deal with the invisible. The sciences have the responsibility to denounce the nonsense spread by the Church and to teach the truth instead. The Church's taboo is a dangerous thing and its consequences have been clearly apparent for centuries. Due to their own culpability, this human race still lives on a bloody planet in spite of all the warnings. No human being on earth can allege that this has nothing to do with either him or her or that they are without blame. One is unfortunately unaware of debts one encumbered during a previous life on this terra. Even those that shout hooray are still accessories to murder. We have been trying to help this humanity who lives on this chosen planet of redemption for thousands of years. And we have met with its inexplicable stubbornness for thousands of years also. Logical thought processes should not solely concentrate on technology or special fields of knowledge, whereby one simply omits the most important field of interest. A voyage to the moon or to Mars is not as important as the exploration of the spiritual realm. It isn't very important whether one finds out what matter the moon consists of, but it is important to find out in which regions man continues to exist after his terrestrial demise, and whether he has to give account for his behaviorism. The exploration of space is therefore quite irrational in comparison, whilst the personal spiritual survival of man after death is absolutely rational. The general level of development of the people on earth is incomprehensible, because this humanity is on the one hand very intelligent, but on the other hand applies this intelligence in a most horrible way, by making each other's lives more difficult and by killing one another. This situation is intuitively felt and deplored by many. This is the reason why people turn away from all religions, as they cannot comprehend that there is supposed to be a God that doesn't intervene in this situation. 8. It has to do with the fact that the God concept has been taught to you and explained to you incorrectly. God isn't here to give every sinner a quick clip around the ears. God is responsible for keeping Mother Nature in order. Man is responsible for keeping order within his own lifestyle. There are no difficulties in regards to determining competence here. I admit that the churches do endeavor to do a lot of good in this world. However, I know that these churches hinder their own progress, because they adhere to their mistakes with an almost ceremonious doggedness. Faith comes from God, that is to say, it comes from the Logos, from the highest rationality. But your church religion, no matter what form or what denomination it comes in, does not spring from logic, but from ignorance and stupidity. We, the Sant Inner, have a mission, namely to enlighten you in this respect. This isn't anything new, it goes back thousands of years. This humanity you in fact has unfortunately been unteachable in this regards. It therefore comes as no surprise that we have stayed away for quite some time to allow this humanity time to reflect. Even our admonitions near a place called Fatima were disregarded. The Church has once again misinterpreted these admonitions and concealed the rest of these admonitions. We have better mediums at our disposal these days, and this allows us to give you a more detailed account. The value of our messages cannot be compared to any Bible, they represent a concentration of the truth. Mankind carries a hankering for the truth within that cannot be satisfied, because base motives hinder the objective truth from surfacing. This is the misfortune of this earth. Nations require elucidations and not religious embellishments. The governments of these nations maintain that they are not responsible for this truth. Apart from that, the representatives of these governments are equipped with false philosophies and theories that do not allow them to take an interest in religious truths. Their atheistic insanity and arrogance is inevitably transferred to the rest of the nation. All of this creates a situation that allows God's antagonist to hold all trumps in his hands. The devil does get a mention, but one does not give his existence credibility. Later, after his demise, man is actually confronted with this existence and then despairs. This human race on terror represents a universal problem we try to solve. We cannot inactively watch how a universal tragedy unfolds. We therefore employ the weapons of the mind and common sense in order to help you. There are treatises aplenty. He who reads these treatises soon realizes that most of them are pure gobbledygook. We are, however, not dealing with treatises here, but with crucial questions about the future, a future that every human being encounters somewhere along the line, even if it takes a number of lives to get there. 9. The fact that the doctrine of reincarnation has been condemned represents an incredible crime against the truth. No meaningful progress whatsoever is possible without reincarnation. Faith without the law of reincarnation is no faith at all, because it leaves the question of why human beings exist at all and why they make an effort unanswered, particularly as they must die after a relatively short period of time. The sciences do not take kindly to the term God, because the churches have humanized this concept. The sciences have however not tried to correct this erroneous concept. God cannot be compared to man. He is irrational, but he exists just the same. The sciences continuously bump into rationality when they examine Mother Nature. The sciences also continuously bump into God, because the rationality that governs Mother Nature is in reality God. This human race will not comprehend this simple theorem. How is this possible? I am convinced that a lot of things would turn for the better, if this simple theorem would be taught convincingly. Universities would find that their students would appreciate this more. Students are not so stupid that they wouldn't comprehend the divine rationality inherent in Mother Nature. However, all rationality, no matter what shape or form it takes, presupposes the existence of a consciousness. There is no rationality without this consciousness. Try to prove that the opposite is true. It is impossible. Consciousness represents a component of God, and this is where we encounter this human likeness. Man also possesses his consciousness. It represents the highest creation throughout the universe. Nothing would exist that could still be perceived without consciousness. Man's consciousness is naturally just a small spark in comparison to the fire of God's Son. This is the real church doctrine. Does any one of your religion come even close to contemplating these things? One prefers to natter and make assumptions instead, so that a disinterest in this subject develops, and this is something politics welcomes. It must not continue along these lines. Abandon your outdated, primitive concepts of a divine heaven and its associated religions. Real religion is something bodacious. But what we observe here on earth is a distortion and a disparagement, and this affronts us deeply. I am pleased about the fact that my messages, which I transmit psychically, have attracted your attention in spite of the fact that one cannot see me. There is a very good reason for this. I thank you for the translations and the dissemination of these communications. I hope that at least some of these messages reach the governing bodies which bear the actual responsibility for this human 10. race. These governing bodies lack the indoctrination that they cannot receive from any university and from any church. We take a close look at the development here on Terra. We are eminently interested, because it is so full of contradictions. The arrogance of religious leaders is certainly not inferior to the arrogance of scientists. We cannot comprehend that the fact of the human soul's existence does not play a part in any of their end. Your deliberations. One ignores it, one does not invest any money in its research, and one simply disputes any insights gained through private initiatives. One lies to whole nations and leads them into an abyss they are unfortunately unaware of. Anything beyond the physical is of no interest to you, because you are not willing to deal with it. The denotation of irrational might mean that it is difficult to comprehend something, but not that it is impossible or that it doesn't actually exist. This denotation is confusing, and it should not be a part of your vocabulary. Even thousands of years ago, people have left their actual thinking to their priests, no matter whether they were able to deal with it or not. Their nonsense was either accepted or forced upon one through punishment. The fallout from this type of rape of the spirit is still visible today. A contaminated planet. Terra is an extraordinarily beautiful planet. But this beauty hides a terrible misery. The fact that there is this enormous number of viruses and bacteria on this planet is unique as far as we know. We are aware that there are circa 200 different types of flu viruses, for instance. We must tell you that the bacteria you have to deal with are absolutely fatal for us. We couldn't survive one of your influenza attacks, for instance, not even a common cold. We had the terrible experience in the past that all Santinor who came down to earth paid with their life for their journeys. We cannot simply land in order to make contact with a representative of some government. You will now understand why we deliver our message on a spiritual basis. This represents the better opportunity for communication, because we avoid being seriously infected this way. We observed that you took intensive protective measures when your astronauts returned from the Moon, however the Moon is not as contaminated as this Earth. You will not believe me when I tell you that the anti-spirit has concentrated his creations on this planet in order to destroy this Terra and all its inhabitants. He considers all possible means justified to achieve this goal. This Earth is a divine planet of redemption, and its assignment is to reform and spiritually train every human being who incarnates on Earth. The anti-spirit is not interested in this process, on the contrary, he wants to prevent it. 11. It isn't an easy task for me to indoctrinate you about something you hardly show an interest in, or something that is given no credibility to. Your great thinkers have naturally dealt with the question of the meaning of the human existence. However, they never found an explanation. The reason for the human existence here on Earth has therefore remained unrecognized. Misery with its various forms of suffering is bad enough, but you are not satisfied. You undertake enormous endeavors to superlatively increase this suffering. Whole industries are set up in order to augment this suffering generation by generation, and their expenditure is counted in billions. I say that the arms industry is in first place, to be followed by the vices like smoking and drugs. The consumption of common salt, sodium chloride, an agent for the preservation of various food products, happens in a completely irresponsible fashion. Poisons. 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 This doesn't seem to worry you at all, even though your offspring will be affected by this. There isn't one single human being here on this planet that doesn't belong in this school of redemption. Most people naturally think that basically, there is nothing wrong with them. However, they do not believe in reincarnation or in karma, or they have never heard of it. There would be no development, no progress at all without reincarnation, but rather a standstill. That would finally end up in a retrogressive step. As the sciences are not interested in reincarnation, they will also not make any progress in their research into the human society. Biology has nothing to do with this, because man's mental substance is not part of biology. One could, for instance, say that you built the pyramids. One could also say that you were once cannibals. That you were members of Genghis Khan hordes. Some of you helped build the Panama Canal. And then there are white-skinned people amongst you who have been sold as slaves in the slave trade between Africa and the Americas. This list is so comprehensive that it is impossible to enumerate. The primary aspect of this whole issue is redemption, and an improvement has been registered in a lot of cases. But there are unfortunately all too many cases where the desired redemption has gone the other way. There are people on this planet who once belonged to the ruling classes, who were even advocates of one religion or another, but nowadays stand so low that they end up living in penitentiaries for the rest of their life. 12. Amongst all these countless people there is not one who apprehends the terrible circumstances of their eternal existence. My ancestors, who already entertained contact with the people on Earth millennia ago, tried to draw your attention to these circumstances. One might have regarded them as gods descended from heaven, but one completely ignored anything they said that might have helped mankind's Redemption. The inherited mental elements are crucial, they must improve and progress according to the divine plan. Your genetic research deals with inherited properties parents and ancestors bring to bear on their offspring. However, nobody has ever entertained the idea that individual human beings assume their own inheritance, one that reaches back thousands of years and one that is absolutely individual. There are parents that look upon their children with horror, because they are able to commit abhorrent capital crimes without showing the slightest remorse. One then asks the question, whom did they inherit this trait from? The actual question remains unanswered. Because one does not take one's own genetic inheritance from a myriad of past lives on this planet of redemption into consideration. All religions who talk about an eternal heaven or of eternal damnation ought to be placed on a funeral pyre. There are of course other worldly regions at the disposal of man. Man's will has enormous opportunities in these spheres. If he however abuses these opportunities, he will immediately land once more on a contaminated planet so that he will come to his senses. Such discernment, however, might be deferred for millennia. I must be some kind of heretic in the eyes of all church representatives, because I speak the truth, a truth that is oh so disagreeable and so undesired. A proverb says, "Sharpen your weapons." There is some truth in this, because only the suffering and the difficulties one encounters on Terra are able to bring about an improvement. Shall I talk about alcohol abuse? You know all about it and you know its consequences. But you are unaware of the enormous effects this has on your genetic inheritance. Your leaders have the power in their hands, but instead of using this power for positive goals, for instance to prohibit and to prevent alcohol abuse, they utilize this power for the superlative destruction and annihilation of whole nations. This planet actually deserves our contempt, because it is inhabited by a dangerous, antagonistic, and ungodly human race. We are however dealing with God's planet of redemption, and this is why we must respect it and try to guide it in the right direction. We do not pretend and we do tell you the truth. This fact verifies our genuine friendship for you. 13. We know of no other humanity throughout the universe that comes even close to registering such a base attitude. There is however a certain level of intelligence present, but this only makes the whole situation even worse in the final analyses. I drew your attention to the Battle of Armageddon 2 during an earlier contact. As you can see, I chose my words carefully then, but you can recognize now that this battle rages all over the world. This unawareness of invisible processes isn't just restricted to the general public, it doesn't exclude the governing bodies either. The enemy is an antagonist of God, and he, who doesn't know this enemy or doesn't give him credibility, is attacked, influenced and abused by him. The suffering on Terra is self-inflicted. You created the world you live in. There is no school and no university that informs you about this fact. Man, in his function and eternity, is the most complex creature throughout the universe. What do you know about your own eternity? The population of this planet shows a disinterest in itself that we cannot comprehend. Man is after all the most important creation throughout the universe, because everything revolves around him. Man is always the center of creation. How terribly dismissive you deal with your fellow man, with your neighbor and your brother. Have you ever heard something about family pride? It is in a sad state of affairs, and this fact clearly shows up in the hatred against other classes, groups, nations, races, and finally in the animosity against one's own mankind, a mankind you are. Absolutely and without fail a part of. An earthling is an earthling, a divine being reincarnated. To be redeemed, it matters not where he is born or what race he is a member of. Only the level of spiritual development might vary, but the right to live, to educate, and to perfect oneself is everyone's right, because the Creator ordained this to be so. The Creator naturally has a different perspective in regards to time and space. What do 10,000 years matter in the scheme of things in regards to the development of man? God can wait, man however thinks he can't. He forces things and only prolongs the time, respectively lengthens the path he must travel on. Megalomania. We have two ways of observing you and of studying you. On the one hand we fly our manned spaceships around your planet. On the other hand we place unmanned flying objects, which are equipped with excellent measuring and observation devices, into your atmosphere. To see the Ashtar Sheran brochure, Armageddon. 14. Due to our observations over years and years we are very well informed. We extensively discussed your behaviorism. We are trying to understand you. We are looking for reasons to excuse your behaviorism, but we find it difficult. However, we squarely put the actual blame for your spiritual backwardness, which also has physical repercussions, down to your general megalomania. This phenomenon called megalomania prevents the acquisition of genuine, important insights. This megalomania is much worse than you assume. No philosopher or social researcher has ever dealt with this important problem. This illness is right across the board and so widely spread that it contaminated the world like a cancerous growth. It is important to delve into this in more detail, so that you are in a position to better assess your situation. This megalomania is so dangerous that it destroys whole nations, well, so much so that it could actually create complete chaos throughout the world. Such an occurrence became particularly obvious during World War II. This megalomania doesn't just show up in certain governing bodies, it affects just about every human being and it hinders one's progress of becoming a better person. Megalomania, even in its minutest form, prevents this planet's assignment and it supports God's antagonist. The moment a person on earth gains the slightest learning, culture, or comes into a little money, he doesn't sit on his laurels and is happy about his situation. This improvement immediately swells his head and he will only feel happy when he behaves in a megalomaniac way against the less fortunate. This makes him lose his objectivity and it immediately produces an evil animosity between himself and all his fellow men. Even his friends only remain his friends if they accept his megalomania, respectively, accept him as being superior. If this doesn't happen, man on earth immediately becomes aggressive. A so-called superior will then show megalomaniac tendencies. Something we do not have here, because it may not be part of man's makeup. What applies to individuals also applies to groups, right up to the government of a nation. Class differences only exist because man's behaviorism is always in connection with megalomania. Megalomania is completely identical with subjectivity, it is a psychic illness that has not been taken into consideration so far, even though it shows a catastrophic level of development in its full materialization. What an individual projects in this regards is also mirrored by the government, which acts with the support of its people. Armament, the type, and the perfecting of catastrophic weapons have come about through centuries of megalomaniac behaviorism. The application of these weapons is supposed to confirm the validity of megalomania. All endeavors for peace are unsuccessful, because the general megalomania mankind has been taught and exposed to, does not allow peace to reign. Peace means absolute renunciation of all kinds of animosities. However, megalomania is an animosity the people on earth are no prepared to do without. Megalomania should belong to the curriculum of human studies. It is knowledge that should be taught at every university. All student unrests are connected to it, because their second reason to rebel is their fight against this megalomania. I know that I shouldn't just criticize. Mistakes made should be confronted with better experiences. 15. Our experiences will serve as an average yardstick. Megalomania on our home planet has virtually been eradicated. Those in higher positions are respected accordingly, but not envied or hated. None of us will treat an inferior or less fortunate in a contemptible way. We will always regard everybody as equal and homogeneous fellow human beings, respectively a link in the chain of the universal humanity. Who can assess with certainty whether a great philosopher hides inside a rubbish removalist? Who can assess whether a highly educated person isn't completely wrong in regards to an important factor? The assessment of individual people is still in its infancy, alone because the overall development of the soul is completely disregarded, or because it is considered a function of the brain. The most important component of a soul is its thoughts. They're invisible but exist just the same. What this terra lacks is a great world teacher, a leader amongst leaders, a sage amongst sages. Even a genius cannot be an archetype, if this genius is afflicted with such shortcomings as megalomania, for instance. Because of this situation, not even the great religions can gain access to the truth. They also display all the tendencies of fault-finders, of subjective stubbornness and tendencies of megalomaniac cults and spitefulness against people of different attitudes. What is lacking is a general respect of divine nature. Terrible examples are not persecuted, but abided by. I will give you just one example of the subjectivity of the churches. We are not dealing with a parable, but with a fact that has only just recently come to light. A murderer and violent criminal in Italy confessed his crimes to his bishop. Because of the confessional secret, the bishop was condemned to remain silent. An innocent man became a suspect and was duly condemned to a life behind bars. The bishop was aware of this, but could do nothing to help acquit the accused. The murderer was consequently shot to death, but the innocently accused remained in jail. This is the fallout of your church dogmas. Our criticism to this: if the church employs the confessional secret, it must only deal with sacral eventualities. Anything else has nothing to do with church affairs. This confessional secrecy is a crime committed on an innocent victim, therefore against God's wishes, because God is the truth and justice. Only the criminal wanted an advantage, because he surmised that his confession would strip him of his sins. However, the church supported this absurd demand. An innocent person had to pay for the rest of his life for this effrontery, and the church remains silent. These are situations we severely condemn. We don't have to remind ourselves, because the power of the church has never been different from 16. The power of secular governments. Most religious tenets are impractical and illogical political guidelines that do not promote progress. Without a scientific supplementation of the knowledge about human beings with their immortal souls, there will always be specific events taking place here on Terra that end up in chaos. This is the reason why this humanity requires a completely new religion, one that is no imaginary faith, but an exact argumentation of a life beyond the physical. When the great teacher, Christ, talked about a required humbleness, he naturally meant the complete renunciation of any kind of megalomania. This illness robs every human being of the ability to love his fellow man. God should really become more aggressive towards man. Well, this is what millions of people hope for. God would really have good reason to be a megalomaniac, but he refrains from doing so. Only his tolerance makes it possible that you hear so little directly from him. God is a consciousness that makes an appearance wherever thought processes are required, that nature cannot produce of its own accord, even if it's only on a cellular level. The information within a cell is based on a thought process of the Creator. Megalomania naturally leads to arrogance. The sciences are also not devoid of this arrogance. On the contrary, arrogance is exceedingly pronounced here. The sciences brag about their knowledge and insights, thereby provoking the enmity of other nations. It is a crying shame that the terrestrial sciences cannot brag about the highest knowledge and insights. How much time is wasted by talking about peace? One is so short-sighted in the process that one isn't at all aware of the potentialities to prepare for peace. It therefore can never produce a positive result. Scientific insights are not the prerogative of one single nation. The whole world depends on these insights. The sciences are, however, not willing or able to concentrate on those insights that are required to promote mankind's higher development. This would eliminate all religions and dogmas, and the world would adopt a homogeneous philosophy, a homogeneous doctrine that would have more meaning than any religion on this earth. He who doesn't believe in the devil is unaware of his most dangerous enemy and is therefore at his mercy. He who is unaware of the means the devil applies is incapable of protecting himself. Telepathic wires pull man hither and thither like a marionette, because he neither sees nor believes in their existence. He does not realize how he is controlled until he turns into a perfected instrument in the hands of his dominator. I have no doubt that there are a number of people here on Terra who try to give this humanity better guidance. These people are mostly unsuccessful, because they are at the mercy of the brutality of their adversaries, or because the effective weapon of ridicule abrogates their efforts. Christ knew what this humanity lacked: a true religion. His mission never really got off the ground, because the prevailing views about religion were too deeply rooted in traditions. Even if Christ still plays an important role these days, it isn't according to his true initial intentions. We are dealing with a falsification of the truth, only in another form. 17. What you lack is more trust in the things you consider unimportant. They are not just important, they are the essence of your existence, which isn't just terrestrial, but also cosmic. Would it be worthwhile to create a whole universe for just one ant? I know your answer, but all your thoughts still go in that direction in spite of it. God created man so that he could comprehend the universe. The whole construction of the universe would not be worthwhile without this comprehension. Everything was created for man's enjoyment and his interests. You, however, believe that planet Earth suffices. It takes more than one single lifetime to comprehend the machinations of nature, even to some degree. Therefore listen to me. The less man comprehends, the more often he will have to return to this planet. He is, however, asked to give account for his thoughts and actions in the between times. Most people live such a disinterested existence that their untrained thought processes prevent any ascendancy. They are therefore not able to comprehend or to critically analyze the events taking place on this Terra. Their leadership, however, counts on that and utilizes them for their own negative purposes. This is why there is such a thing as propaganda, and it promotes something that usually does not comply with the truth. Propaganda knows neither truth nor lie, it has only one aim, namely to be believed and to be heeded. We have observed the means applied to falsely inform this humanity. The greatest publication media like radio, television, and the press operate beyond moral standards, because morals are identical to a higher sense of responsibility. This sense of responsibility is not something that the prominent people within the publication media are endowed with. Politics based solely on violence is completely overemphasized. Megalomania, bereft of religious beliefs, also has no boundaries. It risks the future of a whole human race, and it does not respect any creation. I am aware that my words are not complimentary. If one would use flattery when faced with these facts, one would commit an ungodly hypocrisy. As I said at the beginning, it is very difficult for me to find the right words. Therefore do not feel attacked, because this is not an attack, it is only information. Only a true friend may speak the truth. I am your friend. 18. Optima Fide 3. The worst state of affairs is the fact that the general public has such an unparalleled trust in the sciences. Thus humanity assesses everything according the latest scientific insights. It suffices for a university professor to voice his personal opinion. The rest of the population will then assess things accordingly and in good faith. A government is generally treated with a substantial amount of distrust, whilst a scientist enjoys complete trust. This always presents an opportunity to hoodwink a nation. If a government wants to do something that would not be accepted by the populace without distrust, they profess to base their decisions on scientific knowledge, on statistics, and on famous names. This is a tried and true method. But who keeps an eye on the sciences? It occupies top place, and as there is no institution that is placed higher, it basks in its self-grandeur. Because nobody is there to attack it. This promotes an enormous mistake, namely to prevail as the objective truth and cognizance. This is not the exception, there exists a whole series of mistakes like that, and they are accepted. Their instigators are lauded, venerated, and served up as archetypes to the next generation. The people of this earth, I deliberately do not say peoples, because as far as we are concerned, there is only one people on Terra, are not educated enough to criticize the results and assertions of the sciences. Optima Fide, they accept everything in good faith. If they say so, it must be right. This situation makes wars possible at any time. Our predecessors at biblical times were already aware of what the people on earth lacked in regards to their progress. Without peace, there can never be true progress. Progress cannot solely be judged by economic and technological innovations. What we regard as progress is solely the intellectual maturity achieved by a human race. Your intellectual maturity is frightening. This is the reason why our forefathers recognized that you lack a true religion. You, respectively your ancestors, which most of you were in an incarnation at that time anyway, were indoctrinated. But these indoctrinations were ignored, not believed, or not understood. There is a slight chance that our indoctrinations might be better understood this time around, after 4,000 years. 3. In good faith. 19. Without a universal religion, that is to say, a religion that has validity on other planets also, the human race on Earth will not move forward, that is to say, will never reach a higher level. For as long as there are bellicose disputes, for as long as bombs and cannons are at the ready, for as long as one fights over boundaries and possessions, for as long as one nation or country wants to force its will on another nation, the intellectual level will remain on the lowest level. This level or standard is not determined by opulence or power, and least of all by violence. What is regarded a high standard is a unified brotherliness and mutual respect and considerateness amongst people. The worst part is that no attempts are made to strive for a humane standard. There are some human beings who suffer from the illusion that we are here to enforce this standard through force. These are negative thought processes. Our level of development allows us to employ only positive means. We employ elucidation to begin with, that is to say, a guide to reform your mental attitude. If the responsible people in the Pentagon were aware of the things they will be confronted with after their physical demise, they would refrain from telling their infamous lies. They are aware that we observe them. But as we do not attack them, they believe that they can play their games unhindered. We have a lot of patience, but could this patience not wear thin one day? Your expeditions to the moon are admirable, the more so as they are carried out with means that make such expeditions into space very difficult. Anyway, we have it a lot easier. We have accompanied all of your trips to the moon so far. We must naturally keep a certain distance in order to not endanger your astronauts. We would have liked to have met you on Earth's satellite. This was however unfeasible, because our spaceships are of a very different construction. I actually have the impression that you do not take our spaceship serious enough. At least authoritative people are trying to prevent you from taking them serious. We have not resorted to threats so far. Why should we? You might only laugh about it, because you would find it implausible that we could possibly do something to you with our flying objects. May I remind you of the book of Moses, wherein it states that he who comes near the cloud will be put to death. But this cloud was actually one of our spaceships. They are more advanced these days. The essential stages of man's development are actually very easily understood. I will enumerate 20 them. Man does not descend from apes, but from the combined fauna and flora of the universe. Every life form has made a contribution to make the most eminent creation, namely man, possible. This development required eons. The similarity to an ape is as coincidental as the similarity to a cow who possesses the same reproductive organs and whose procreation process runs exactly along the same lines. This already represents a distinctive example of optima fide. What a scientist assumes in his ignorance is elevated to and proclaimed as scientific knowledge. Man's development has already gone well beyond that of animals. His brain capacity towers over that of every other creature. The scientists are absolutely not interested in where the soul descends from. But it is the soul, after all, that makes the man. Man's development is not subjected to any limitations whatsoever. The intellectual development is certainly not dependent on the brain's activity, it takes place on a spiritual level. When a person dies, that is to say, when a person separates from physical matter, the actual human being still remains, the difference being that he no longer perceives physical matter as something solid. This new environment offers many opportunities. He first of all gains an overview over his multifaceted past lives. He is then able to identify his own development. This is akin to facing one's own court of law. There is no masquerading in the so-called hereafter. Man is as naked as never before, that is to say, every creature there is able to see him exactly the way he is. However, freedom must be earned. He, who has not developed enough to earn his freedom, must accept the opposite. You can well imagine that this condition is not particularly pleasant, because every human being surely enjoyed more freedom here on earth. When this condition amongst like-minded souls becomes too unpleasant, man usually remembers that prayers might help. This depiction, which happens to be the truth, is what you call a hot potato. This hot potato has been with you for thousands of years, and this is why it is about time to mitigate, respectively. To cool this hot potato down, so that it can be touched by everybody. Man can experience God's grace, if all his many prayers are heard. He will then be selected to incarnate again, and he will return with his karma, as you call it, back to earth. This process can repeat itself ad infinitum. But what happens to a more advanced human being? 21. He enters a level, a region of enlightenment after his disembodiment, where he will be in company of like-minded people. He can then offer his assistance to serve mankind. He can learn a lot, and he can regale in the incomparable beauty and miscellaneousness of the divine creation, which surpasses anything terrestrial by far. That's how simple this indoctrination really is. You find it so terribly difficult to believe in it. From your childhood to the present, you have been lied to and duped too often. Some of you might ask why we know this so accurately. My answer to this is because we are many thousands of years ahead of your own development. This is why our knowledge and insights are ahead of yours by miles accordingly. The spiritual dimensions are certainly not beyond your grasp, but they are ignored and discriminated against. All native tribes on Terra have dealt with this spiritual plane. They are aware of its existence. Just how they deal with this is another story. But their insights are certainly based on practice and experience. Through endless observations and studies, we have determined the level of development of this human race. Its physical development is far superior to its mental development. This doesn't just apply to the masses of the Earth's population or the less well-off working class. Even the most intelligent amongst you are not exempt from this, because it is mostly a one-sided type of development in their case. An external brilliance, but an empty and inconsequential content. Their external brilliance creates a false image of enormous intelligence, whilst the reality is far from being the truth. A part of intelligence is the ability to logically rationalize phenomenal processes, something the sciences portray as a conundrum. Everything logic cannot explain, everything beyond man's intellectual capacity, remains enigmatical. The word mystery should not be used by the sciences at all, at the most the term unexplored should be used. 22. Supernaturalism. 4. The people on this planet have an almost pathological fear of the supernatural. This reaches a point where not even the sciences are exempt from this. Scientists try very hard not to believe in magic. If they were aware of the important role magic plays within nature, they would be ashamed. The danger lays in the fact that magic could very easily lead to higher knowledge and from there into the divine regions. This is something the sciences do not want at all. This is why they draw an invisible barrier around the empirical natural sciences that is supposed to fend off anything that could, according to circumstances, have anything to do with God or with invisible spirit beings. This is why one rejects us and our messages. Our spaceships seem too magical to supernatural and therefore too unreal to them. As the thought processes of these people are influenced, if not determined, during their education at academies and universities, they are unable to free themselves from certain theorems and prejudices. Supernaturalism is not abstract, but it does require more serious contemplation, a kind of meditation. The annulment of gravity is only possible with the help of magic. The same applies to the difficult repolarization of antimatter. It will take a long time before you will grasp your true reasons for being, if the existence of magic is denied. Man is actually a veritable masterpiece of magic. You are hardly familiar with all the things man's thoughts can accomplish. To negate this natural science is to adhere to old resolutions and guidelines. This old and dusty attitude within academic circles must be blown to smithereens. Enormously important insights await their appearance in lecture rooms at universities. If one is of the opinion that the most important things have already been delved into, I can only say, you have only just begun. One cannot simply ignore the Creator. The two spirit forces oppose one another. Both of them fight over the dominion of planet Earth. He, who rejects the devil's existence, does not benefit from his own faith in God. This enemy is verily amongst you, and his powers are enormous, so enormous in fact that even God, the Creator, must muster all his strength to deal with it. For supernaturalism, an ideology that looks beyond nature and the natural. The belief in the supernatural, in a supernatural revelation, particularly in a theological direction, circa 1780–1830, spoke out against rationalism and emphasized the revelation of God as beyond rational thought. 23. How helpless you really are. If you ignore this negative entity, or if you show him just a little sympathy, you will be lost. Only God's merciful organization can offer you the opportunity to start from the beginning, and it will not get easier, on the contrary, it will become ever more difficult. You should presuppose 5 less, because if you are unfamiliar with the basic knowledge in regards to creation, you will over again come to the wrong conclusions, and they will continue to guide you into precarious blind alleys. 6. What could take place is that a rescue attempt could bring the opposite result. This is why we are extremely careful. Our restraint in the matter isn't quite to your taste. You are bellicose and vengeful. However, we are not. Your leaders would gain great pleasure if they could put one over us. This has been tried all too often, but it will never succeed. Deceitfulness fights a losing battle against magical superiority. You will only harm yourselves. Trying. Your languages are very inadequate, it matters not which major language we use. The very terminologies that are so important in regards to making the divine comprehensible are lacking. I have considered and reconsidered the words that I should use. It is impossible. The enormously widespread and deep-rooted religious concepts of God or Christ, also Mohammed and Buddha, stand in the way of the truth, and therefore also in the way of my elucidations. The inability of your power of imagination in regards to this makes us shake our heads in disbelief. He who dies, makes a veritable journey to an undisclosed destination, he goes on a mystery tour. Ferrite ins Blowy. What sort of a situation is this, when one doesn't know one's destination? 5. Presuppose, assume, presume, suspect. 6. We have desisted from making any comments about Ashtar Sheran's statements, because we do not want to lessen the impact of his explanations. We have neither left a word out nor added anything. It is an absolutely original message. 24. You can thank your religions for this journey to an undisclosed destination, for this veritable mystery tour, because they cannot give you any information about your actual destination. The journey doesn't always end up at a pleasant destination, it ends up in a dark place most of the time. This doesn't mean that one's consciousness is obliterated in this darkness. On the contrary, it is superlatively awake and active. Without the help of meaningful reincarnations, that is to say, rebirths on earth, this humanity would no longer exist. There would be no progress at all, and the level of Neanderthal would not have been surpassed. In spite of their negativity, the people on earth make some relatively slow progress. The physical world you live in represents only a small part of your actual existence. Like an iceberg, only about 1/8 rises above the surface of the formidable ocean of creation. But what the cosmos stores in thought and memory vibrations, is beyond the comprehension of any human mind, well, even beyond our comprehension. Not one event, not one thought and not one moment is ever lost. It is all neatly stored within an enormous archive. Almost all vital guidelines in regards to the human existence are completely falsely represented. Because the alleged brainiest people on this earth, who create or condone these guidelines, are absolutely convinced that the demise of a human being and the associated destruction of the human brain puts a stop to the consciousness of man. This conviction culminates in such undemonstrable nonsense like the assumption that consciousness is bound to physical matter. 1. Assumes that it is impossible for consciousness to exist without the presence of physical matter. There are 100 million pieces of evidence of a non-physical existence of man's consciousness on the other hand, but they are all called hallucinations, illusions, illnesses, hysteria, self-deceptions or superstitions. This sort of mischief gives us a shock that is not easy to overcome. This isn't just stupidity, this is selective malevolence and unprecedented conceitedness in regards to divine phenomena, which are purely there to convince you of greater assignments and other worlds. This type of inherited madness can never turn this terra into a paradise. Pre-existence. Many developments on this terra cannot run along ordered lines, because the majority of people know too little about their own existence. Just who is interested in his own pre-existence, that is to say, in the existence of the human soul before the present incarnation? The memory of it has been obliterated. There is a valid reason for this, because the memory of a past life would only have a cumbering and hindering effect. Even though this memory is missing, man still possesses subconscious intuitive fragments of 25. Certain character traits, talents, experiences, and other psychic attributes. All of these mental peculiarities of his pre-existence combine to create an individual human being. These characteristics are more powerful than the genetic inheritance received from the parents. Many parents ask the question, why is it that our child is so different from the rest of us? Nobody else within our family acts like this child. The parents are unaware of the pre-existence that has formed the child so crucially. Every human being is archetypical. 7. To assume that a human being, with the ability to become a Nobel Prize laureate, developed the required intelligence within one terrestrial lifetime is a complete misjudgment and disregard of intelligent nature, ergo God. This is so unbelievably absurd that one could doubt the intelligence within all the sciences. Have a closer look at your own children, right from birth. All children already display abilities that they could never acquire within a few months, if the experience wasn't intuitively present. When born, all human beings enter a world they know, because it has been their allocated home for millennia. This is why it is so inconceivable that you segregate from one another so much, that you fight one another and that you arrogate rights over others that do not really exist. This is inconceivable and only the result of a malicious disregard of esoteric and spiritual research. In a few years from now, you could actually become a citizen of a nation you presently engage in a merciless war. The countries you envy or disregard could provide a future home for you. Please do not neglect this research and avoid any attempts to interpret the results differently or to discriminate against them. You have no idea how important pre-existence really is for the development of this Terra. Subconscious archetypical characteristics are enormously powerful. We are not dealing with characteristics that stem from the genetic inheritance of your forefathers, that is to say, from other human beings. The genetic inheritance of these archetypical characteristics is individual and forms part of line of ancestors you represent yourself. I hope that I have managed to express myself clearly with these few words. Important terminologies your languages do not have in their vocabulary are lacking. I now come to the most important factor, and it represents the absolute cause for all human behaviorism. The existence of this Terra and the whole human race don't make sense without this knowledge. The uppermost occurrence on this planet is war. Warfare goes back many thousands of years. 7. Archetype, Psychology, CG. Jung calls it a portion of the collective human subconsciousness that is based on the original model of amassed experiences of past generations. Its emergence takes place in certain situations like in dreams, fantasy, and visions in the form of symbols. 26. Warfare in any shape or form is an archetypical occurrence. Due to man's pre-existence, something he knows or forebodes nothing about, he has had contact with warfare in many shapes and forms for millennia. Warfare has always had an enormous influence on the people on Earth throughout all the lives lived in the past. This chain of events has managed to create the most powerful archetypical habitude in man. This phenomenon already shows up in babies, and infants already display aggressiveness and a will to destroy. As man lives on a planet of redemption, he will not be able to extricate himself from this Terra due to this characteristic. Only a few people are successful in freeing themselves from this devilish attitude. The bellicosity acquired during many incarnations increases with every generation. Technological developments and new scientific insights continuously provide man with new means to fully express his inherited bellicose habitudes. The enormous disrespect shown one's fellow human beings does not develop during one single lifetime, it goes all the back to Neanderthal man. This is where the development of personality has come to a standstill. This is where man fails, and this is why, due to his repetitive behaviorism, he does not deserve to be called a human being. The invisible list of crimes committed every human being possesses stays with them for millennia. If one takes all of this into consideration, one finds it easy to explain this dissension amongst the people of this Terra. Intuitive hatred against one's fellow men, against one's nearest, but envy and malice are also characteristics acquired due to one's pre-existences, and they are not that easy to shake off. War is a crime against humanity. War can neither be excused nor extenuated. Every ballad that lauds heroism is an infamous lie. I call all of this an inherited ignobility that is not thought through by the human race. We are absolutely appalled by the constant preparations for genocide. Armies seem to be the most important thing here on Terra. Industries are dealing with the creation of super weapons. The sciences are looking for new weapons of destruction without taking the law of cause and effect into consideration. The sciences are actually aware of the law of cause and effect. But when they are dealing with murdering human beings, they don't take any notice of it. Are you really that stupid that you believe that this irrevocable law of nature makes exceptions when one is dealing with an alleged inescapable war? 27. The bill is inevitable and it will inevitably be presented to those criminals that are confronted by the effect. It is difficult to decide between feeling commiseration for these people or to feel gratified that justice will be done. This humanity presents us with an enigma. We certainly keep you at arm's length. You have not made any progress in this regards. The portentous influence of false church doctrines has spoiled you. This also goes back a long way. Scientific insights are completely adequate to show that everything is subject to the law of causality. But in regards to man's existence on this terra, one believes that these causes have no recessive effects. Is it because the body decays, because it dissolves? This, however, is not the whole story, because the sciences refuse to acknowledge the immortal soul. Man, however, performs some functions that clearly indicate the presence of a soul. Is this supposed to be without effect? How can one ignore such vital things so flippantly? Terrestrial sciences still assume that the soul is nothing more than a function of the brain. The reality, however, is the complete opposite. The soul produces consciousness within the cerebrum. The cerebrum has also other, independent functions that serve the purpose of controlling the body. They are vegetative, that is to say, of a subconscious nature. But these functions can also be influenced by the soul. As the leading heads of state and their governments have been programmed by university knowledge, they draw the wrong conclusions. They therefore guide this mankind in a wrong direction, and this is something the broader masses are unaware of. Man's consciousness is on one hand dependent on the programming of this consciousness and, on the other hand, on the archetypical memory of its pre-existence. Psychology deals with assumptions that on no account comply with the truth. The blind faith demanded by the major religions is virtually on a war footing with scientific insights. This situation has always encouraged governments to make life and death decision on behalf of nations. You presently experience this very situation, namely that one asks for the support of the Church before one commits a bloody genocide. 28. The Christian Church has never blenched from blessing weapons and from asking God to ensure victory. As far as governments were concerned, this was only to comfort the broader masses in whose name these crimes were committed. This is tough talk, but I mentioned at the beginning of my message that I find it difficult to use the right words. The fact that we monitor events on this planet with our spaceships is irrefutable. We will continue to enervate these types of aspersions with our presence. The belief in a God, actually any belief in a higher existence and level of being, is influenced by pre-existence. If a person living on Earth has therefore been influenced in past lives by constantly being exposed to church dogma, especially if religious obedience was demanded, the recessive consequences are still being felt. Intuitively, albeit completely subconsciously, but somehow guessing, man on Earth refuses to accept a new religion, a completely new religious knowledge base. He is unable to explain why, but he feels reluctant. The unbelievably violent crimes committed by people one would not expect such deeds from have their origin in their pre-existence. It is therefore not the environment they grow up in, but their own self-inherited compulsion to commit their atrocities. Many might now say that these elements have no right to be on this planet. This is a huge aberration. Terra has been a planet of redemption for the human existence from the beginning. Even those that behave so horribly should also be improved. There are no exceptions here. He, who asked God for mercy, will receive this mercy. Just how he behaves on earth after is his own affair. He will have the opportunity to either ascend or regress even further. These are actually the things the churches should teach you. But what do they actually do? To our disappointment, we had to observe that particularly the representatives and guardians of the churches are everything else than archetypes. Well, it is a well-known fact that they smoke and drink in the most sacral of places, not to mention all the other derailments that take place. God demands a new religion. Christ demands a new religion. All the other religious founders demand a new religion. I demand a new religion. All brothers and sisters in other star systems, where human life is possible, demand a new religion. The absurd humanization of the Creator must come to an end one day. The identification with God by certain people must cease. Creation is sacred enough as it stands. 29. The younger generation does not want to be duped, they demand a religion of truth. But where on earth do you find a truth that adolescents can believe in and venerate? If you don't suppress our messages, you will be able to build a true religion from this basis. I thank all the people who have been willing to prepare the way for these messages. Billions are spent on mass murder. Millions are set aside for lies. But only a few cents are spent on behalf of the truth. What an appalling situation! Just how great must be your suffering before you make a step towards redemption? Most believers in UFOs, as you call them, would like to know how we live on our own home planet. I have been very quiet in this regards. I know that it is impossible to make a comparison. The difference between Terra and our planet Metharia is too great. Once the children on Earth begin to make a start towards a better life, they will also find out how things are on our planet. The Christian churches have complained about the fact that so many people leave the community of the church. Is it any wonder? The churches, in their irrationality, have even promoted this movement away from the church. They allowed the most negative of negativity to enter the church. They want to be modern and topical, and they are completely unaware that being modern and topical is orchestrated by the devil. The church authorities in Germany have made a great mistake. They allowed condensed sermons to be broadcast on television. This actually produced the exact opposite. It promoted the prevailing antipathy. The worst and most inept interpreters one could ever imagine were allowed to conduct these sermons. The results were accordingly. Promoting faith in God requires the best and most apt interpreters that can be found on earth, and no gullible fumblers. In any case, church authorities lack the required introspection. 8. They will never recognize their mistakes without it. True religion must synchronize with the insights of the natural sciences. A situation where the natural sciences interfere with the faith in God may not arise. No human being on earth is aware of what confronts them after their disembodiment. The present critical situation would not exist if one was aware of it. No human being would take the risks. Instead of the truth, empty words and phrases are propagated. 8. Introspection, self-observation. Observing one's own mental processes to gain psychological self-knowledge. 30. It is unfortunately so decisive, when pre-existence, ergo, when one's existence is over many past Lives have progressed so badly, so untruthfully. The human spiritual core is intuitively burdened by this. Without being aware of it, man acts and thinks in the way he has become accustomed to during his many past lives. It isn't easy for him to deviate from this intimateness he so cherishes. Only an enormous reformation in regards to his mental attitude can help him here. The habitude of hating people, of destructiveness, and of murder are so powerfully developed that he tends to satisfy this predisposition even when playing games and in sport. A boxing match is one example that springs to mind. Games were played in one's pre-existence that absolutely resulted in one's death. This sadism has remained within the soul of man, and he now looks for an outlet through all kinds of means. If there is no opportunity for him to do anything physical in regards to this, he wants at least to enjoy this through other means. He wants to see gruesome murder scenes in films. He wants to participate in the atrocities of wars from the security of his armchair. He satisfies his prehistoric sense for pleasure through pictures and sound, through writing and, above all, through his treacherous fantasy. These are the causes for your miserable world situation, which represents a causal effect. Nevertheless, mankind calls for a just and permanent peace. Millions of prayers rise up to heaven. This is the real reason why we continuously allow ourselves to be swayed by you. We do everything we can to make this peace possible. We can, however, not force this peace upon you. Only you can arrange peace yourselves. This is your affair. We help you by providing you with the truth, because this planet Terra is a planet of untruths. The government is prepared to lie if this promises advantages. Religion also tells you a lot of lies. Industries even more so in order to boost their profits. This is not an exaggeration. You will have already noticed that nations accuse one another of having committed one crime or another, or that one asserts that one or another nation has started to commit these crimes. Per aspera ad astra. 31. This human race must reach the light through the dark of night. Per aspera ad astra, ergo, along rough roads towards the stars. This is why certain people must become acquainted with the suffering on this earth, that is to say, not just individually, but also learn to understand what the suffering of their fellow men is all about. Only through suffering in every form or shape does man reach a situation where he will begin to respect the most precious gift of all, life itself. Stars have always meant something wonderful in your poetry, something to reach out for. Some poems say, "I will bring you stars from heaven." Well, it doesn't have to be a lot of stars. One star is already coming to meet you. We bring you a message of peace from another star. The way we bring you this is a natural process for us, but it does seem unnatural to you. However, isn't the content of this message the most important thing? This is why it shouldn't really matter how it comes to you. It wasn't given at Fatima, but comes to you from a sorely tested city, Berlin, which represents a paradigm for this mankind's obstinacy. Obstinacy prevents all progress. Millions must die because of obstinacy. Obstinacy is the power source behind dogmatism. Most political views are not proven by anything. But if these political views are eventually verified, it only happens because they were negative. They do, however, trigger wars, and with advancing technology, these in turn become ever more inhumane. Every war is an unpardonable blasphemy, because it destroys parts of the divine creation. Every injustice inflicted on a human being is an attack on the Creator, who created man to be the highest consciousness within fauna. But the people on earth do not think that far. Moral instructions are lacking at schools and universities. A false philosophy is taught instead. Children are already reared to put up a resistance against doctrines and experiences these days. But when authority is undermined, the law of causality must come into effect. The effect is called disrespect for the human society. This poses the question of whether man can be reared without coercion and without standards. This is impossible with democratic methods. Democratic freedom must be earned, because without a corresponding maturity, this freedom is only misunderstood and abused. Where should a child or a young adolescent, here on this planet for its own redemption, take this democratic maturity from? 32. Only a few people possess this maturity, let's say a group of people that does not attract attention. God has imposed a certain compulsion on every human being. He has his laws, and those that trespass or disregards these, will be punished. This makes God undemocratic in your eyes. But who knows the criminal tendencies of human beings? An upbringing geared towards anti-authoritarian principles releases these tendencies. You are unable to predict the effects the release of these tendencies, these base instincts, has in 20 or in 30 years from now. If the teacher is useless, his doctrines are also not to be trusted. When the archetype fails, one cannot expect anything positive from the mimicker either. Every human being needs a leader, an authority he must obey. If he fails to do so, he will come to grief, because the authority is there to guide the protégé up to a higher level. This terrestrial humanity is in dire need of an authority, because due to the fact that it is mentally underdeveloped, it requires a high rate of protection. However, authority must also be an archetype, otherwise it is not entitled to be an authority, that is to say, it must be earned in order to enjoy respect. We have reached the core of authoritarian upbringing here. When authority is not respected and acknowledged, its doctrines and laws are also not taken notice of. Every authority is in a way a lawmaker, because regulations form also part of the law. This starts with the parents and ends with the Creator. This fact cannot be ignored. It is impossible, and it only leads to chaos. God's antagonist disrespected God's authority. This made him fall from grace and caused all this chaos. Therefore, he who does not acknowledge God's authority will suffer the same fate. His life will end up in chaos. God is sacred. He who does not accept his authority does not regard anything as being sacred. He shows no consideration for anything, and only fear will stop him from doing anything vile. Children and adolescents require authority from parents and educators. If they are archetypes, their rules and regulations will be observed. But if they are not archetypes, their rules and regulations will be trampled underfoot. 33. This is why children cannot be brought up along anti-authoritarian principles, because the moment one attempts to do so, one admits that one has lost control of the situation and one can no longer be considered an archetype. A situation where non-programmed, that is to say, inexperienced children and adolescents are allowed to do whatever they feel like, cannot be tolerated. This lack of inhibitions is the greatest nonsense we have ever heard of. Every child is unredeemed, otherwise it would not have incarnated on this planet of redemption. The base instincts and habits of pre-existence are still with it. These genetic factors have to be combated and suppressed. No child is born a philosopher, it can therefore not decide of its own accord what is really right. This ignorance and inexperience is supposed to be compensated for through the authority of the parents, the educators. Children will otherwise seek their archetype amongst their like-minded contemporaries. But this will lead to the demise of morals. The belief in the democratic rearing of children based on freedom stems from modern psychology, a new science that has no real concepts in regards to man's soul and therefore elevates completely twisted and mendacious insights to become doctrine. We have no regard for this type of psychology, because it is preposterous in our eyes. A government demands of its people to be recognized as an authority. But how can a people accept a government as an archetype, if it is insincere, if it goes to war, it is abets vices, and if it seeks to do dirty business, and if it affronts and discriminates against its neighbors? This diminishes all authority, and revolution, in the form in an anti-authoritarian movement, begins to go to work. This leads to constant unrest and to discontentment amongst many of the nations of this terra. It would have been impossible for us to bring these sorts of messages to you about 30 years ago. It has only been possible for us to study the world languages over the last few years to a degree where we are in a position to express ourselves more clearly. We have naturally invented technological means to help us. When the prophet Moses, as a guest of the Santinner in one of their spaceships, was indoctrinated over a period of 6 weeks, he was unable to completely comprehend our elucidations. His mind and his education were completely inadequate for this. But we clearly explained to him just how an important role authority plays in the lives of human beings. This is why we did not object to the fact that people thought that the spaceship commander was actually God. Many of the Santinner were also regarded as gods later on. If things had been different, this or these gods could have immediately become the complete opposite, and we would have been regarded dangerous enemies. I am trying to show you with this example just how quickly respect for authority can turn into terrible animosity. The people on earth are confronted with the same example with Christ. He was the great teacher and healer to begin with, the Savior, but when his divinity was all of a sudden in doubt, it turned into lethal hatred. 34. Authority must be earned, otherwise it is just an unpleasant dictatorship. I now ask myself the question of whether the Great Spirit deserves to be called an authority or a dictator. The whole universe bears witness to this. He who doesn't see this is wrong. Nature's unimaginable intelligence surpasses the thought processes of whole humanities, with all their scientific and technical aids. But nature projects love, beauty, and progress. These are authority's guarantees, even though its consciousness is not tied to a human being, but exists separately, as a non-physical consciousness. When this authority is beyond doubt, its laws and regulations are to be followed and abided by correspondingly. Only doing so can preserve mankind from suffering damage. It is akin to a father saying to his child, "Do not venture onto the ice, because the ice will break." If this well-meant advice is not abided by, the law of causality comes into effect and harm is inevitable. One can, however, not blame the authority for this, the way the people on earth are prone to do in most cases. Every derailment within nature is either an attack by God's antagonist or the fault of mankind. God is infallible. He is your educator, not as a dictator, but as the highest authority throughout the universe. Pornography. This notation implies everything, namely obscene literature. In spite of this unambiguous conclusion, this bawdiness takes on enormous forms and proportions. This lack of intelligence and base moral standards reveal a terrestrial level we find impossible to describe. This has nothing to do with essential sex education. This is profiteering from the base instincts of a regressing humanity. Very few people are aware that this wave of pornography is a part of the battle of Armageddon, that is to say, is part and parcel of the dispute between good and evil. The devil finds full support here, because he clearly recognized right from the very beginning of this human race that love is the best target to ruin people, and that this will enable him to exact his revenge on God. The mutual respect between the genders represents the basic principles of love. If man on earth is unaware of the enormous spiritual forces that administer their power over him, he will not be able to comprehend the machinations of the antagonist. As I mentioned before, the devil is not some kind of fairy tale figure, he is no vision of fantasy, but 35. A conscious negativity of a powerful spirit, whose infamy is beyond human comprehension and imagination. His intentions and his might are inscrutable, but enormously dangerous in regards to the human development. This dangerous spirit force, with its many helpers and constrained followers, endeavors to destroy this mankind, destined for redemption. There is no mercy and also no feeling of humaneness. His dominion is worse than any kind of cruelty within the animal kingdom. There is absolutely no comparison, because this negativity is unique in its dimension and dangerousness, as well as its finesse and its profound shrewdness. The negative knows exactly where to find man's weaknesses. There is an almost effortless and absolutely sure way that leads him to success. One of these weaknesses is the whole area of sexual love. He has an easy time of it with all that prostitution and perversities, right down to pornography. As far as he is concerned, mankind has never been as accommodating as is presently the case. During the Battle of Armageddon, people who think that nothing is sacred, who neither believe in God nor the devil, who actually have no idea that the soul survives, make the most lewd deals with love dragged through the mud. This leads to an indescribable contamination of the mind. Only after their demise will they realize just what they have dealt with. Man's subconscious is not an easy thing to purge, and it determines one's abode in the spheres. I am not against doing something that comes naturally, even if it is of a sexual nature. Something natural can never be wrong. Pornography, however, has nothing to do with naturalness. Pornography is an intended defilement of the human soul, of morals, and of a healthy sense of propriety. Someone who shows an interest in the deformation of love loses his sense of good taste and will inevitably fall ill due to this devilry. This illness can, however, barely be cured, and it can lead to complete impotence. The state is responsible for educating and rearing its people. But what do governments do in regards to this issue? Based on our inquiries, I know that this humanity's leaders are siding with the negative, that they are therefore in the camp of our opposition. The individual level of the sexual partners determines the level of the incarnation. We are not just dealing with genetic inheritance factors. But what can you expect from an incarnation, when the mental state is so contaminated? In order to explain this correctly, I would have to dictate thick-set volumes. But I can unfortunately only give you a very abridged report. Important is whether one will believe my explanations at all. One cannot concentrate on a few sentences only in order to say that what I say is correct. This whole message is so absolutely true, and it can only be looked at in its entire context. 36. Even the most primitive people on Terra distance themselves from the kind of derailment pornography represents. These people see in sexual love a divine act, one that is even venerated in their temples. But what does a civilized person do, one who asserts to be better than a primitive tribesman? What is even worse than the pictorial presentation of sexual intimacy is the base fantasy expressed in words and in writing. There is no excuse for this. It is the most offensive thing a human being can create with his intelligence. He, who abuses his God-given intelligence in such a terrible way, deserves more than just to die. These people are not to be pitied, because they debauch millions of people and rob them of the redemption of their existence. In other words, these people have lived their lives on terra in vain. Procreation is sacred. Pornography secularises this act. Just how much more intelligent, so as not to say more decent, are less educated people like for instance in India and a few other countries? These people know no obscenity. Prevailing materialism abuses one of the most powerful urges of man in this way, namely the compulsion to procreate, the preservation of the human species, and it does this through pornography. The authorities do not put a halt to all this profiteering. It is a terrible thing to imagine the mental state those people will be in, those that are presently still living on Earth, when they are born once again on this planet after a number of years have passed. We have undertaken many a dangerous journey, in order to prevent the relegation of this human race. I am aware that there are a number of people who say that they are of the old school. I direct my urgent message at these people. He, who doubts the truth behind these messages, should read certain sections of the Bible, because these types of messages have already come to you many thousands of years ago. They were unfortunately not taken serious. The human procreation is the greatest natural event throughout the universe. This creative act is dragged through the mud in an unbelievable fashion. This represents a surefire sign of the blight of mankind on Earth. In spite of this, I am convinced that there are a number of people on Earth that are absolutely aware of this sacredness and who try everything within their power to counteract this dissolution. We, the Sant Inner, are waiting for this spiritual breakthrough. A lot of reorganization must take place. Our messages should appeal to your senses. 37. You should contemplate this. I know that the general public is disgusted by pornography. The apex of bawdiness has already been reached. The small country of Denmark is proof of that. This is where a complete degradation of healthy, sanctified feelings took place. It can't get any lower than this. This small country is not engaged in a war, but it sinks into a morass in an incredible way. This leads to a general indignation and abhorrence, particularly because this obscenity and vulgarity is so publicly displayed. I am therefore convinced that these examples will have an effect on other countries. One will soon find out that the human race on Earth cannot progress in this way. Puritanism 9 will not longer exist in the future, because the masses are pretty much in the picture as far as sex is concerned, but it is imperative that new boundaries are drawn. One will have to make better judgments in regards to what is required elucidation in sex education and what is simply indecent. Pornography is no exception, because it is also subject to the laws of cause and effect. Such an all-time low of the participating parties has a profound retrogressive effect, and as life goes on after their disembodiment, the consequences have to be atoned for. Curiosity is immense, but it is quite apparent that more than 50% of the inquisitive are shocked in spite of this. It surpassed their wildest expectations of negative pornography. A certain amount of stagnation is presently taking place. 1970, but don't be deceived, this is only the calm before the storm. Internet. Our spaceships will once again make an appearance. Drawings in old caves indicating our existence are paid more and more attention to, even if thousands of years have passed. One will progressively have to make a clear distinction between what belongs to ufology and what is genuine religion. These two have been intermingled up to now, and apart from this, many UFO phenomena have been completely erroneously interpreted. For as long as mistakes rule this humanity, its ascent cannot take place. This is why you shouldn't just improve your social situation, but above all, improve your spiritual interests and also your mental attitude in regards to apparently inexplicable phenomena. Coeducation, that is to say, educating both genders in the same classroom, was a great mistake. Pornography is a part of this coeducation. The two genders have plenty of opportunities to mingle outside of school lessons. Because they behave unnaturally during shared lessons and they pull the wool over one another's eyes. I maintain that the genera are devaluated through a shared education, particularly because intimate privacy is disturbed, whereby natural modesty disappears. 9. Puritanism, morally strict, deliberately simple, especially in regards to lifestyle, Spartan. 38. You have no idea how important this natural modesty really is. It is closely linked to the mutual respect for one another. One cannot love a woman who is without this sense of natural modesty. And the reverse is also true. You must have realized by now just how important love is in the interrelationship between people. Some of you might have realized in the meantime just how important this message really is. I have no idea to what degree it will be made available to the general public. But I underline the urgency of this assignment. Scientists are already aware of the enormous processes taking place within the female body. But where is the reverence for this magnificent affair? Don't you think that the act of procreation should also be included in this reverence? I cannot comprehend why the sciences do not oppose pornography. The sciences should really be obligated to indicate the sacredness of procreation. Are the sciences here on Terra really so unbelievably brutalist and therefore indifferent? Only a normal, healthy cohabitation between the genders can save this Terra from doom. The ever-increasing degenerateness of the younger generation already warns us about a terrible future. This human race requires better leaders not only the experienced can look up to with reverence, but also adolescents. But one is more concerned about defending countries and states. One does, however, not concern oneself with the defense of decency and the health of the general public. More than 22 billions, 1970, are set aside for the necessary defense of the nation in Germany alone. I therefore ask, how many millions have been approved to promote the human spirit? I mean this. In regards to general elucidations about actual facts, one unfortunately keeps silent about. One of your proverbs states, whatever is in the process of falling should be pushed. We are certainly in a position to push this earth, because it is already in danger of falling into a cosmic abyss. But we know that most of these proverbs and verses amount to nothing. We try to support, to uplift this human race. The great leaders and politicians who govern this humanity received an incomplete and partially false upbringing. The programming of the brain was and is incorrect. Their whole thought process is therefore not the way it should be. What do you think it takes to make a genuine leader? All the many wars that have taken place and are still taking place here on this Terra are actually only the machinations of government. The people themselves do not want to go to war, but they are powerless chess pieces in the hands of their government officials, who have gained their positions with the help of party comrades and expensive propaganda. They operate with the money and with the lives of the peoples who put their trust in them. 39. Emancipation. Because women play such an important role in regards to mankind's progress, I must talk about emancipation. According to our determinations, this emancipation has proceeded in a wrong direction, and this represents everything else but progress. Even the word equality of rights is not appropriate here. One has already ascertained that the bowstring of good intentions is much too tight. I am very much in favor that women receive the same real job-related chances for promotion as men. I am also in favor of women having the right of self-determination in politics. But I am equally, resolutely opposed to discriminating against and oppressing women. I am also not in favor of seeing women trying to outperform men or to deprive them of their standing. America has already produced some grotesque role reversals. The concept of equal rights for women is falsely understood by most people. The words equal rights should not be used in connection with this assimilation. One should rather say, social assimilation. This puts a different connotation on the subject. Falsely interpreted rights lead to incorrect ways of living and by force to decadence. This is a very serious situation, because the hormonal balance within the female body is completely disturbed. These types of disorders in turn have a detrimental effect on their general health. Decadence always has some negative effects that are not always immediately apparent. In spite of all that diligence and ambition, women should always seek to remain women. One might easily get the impression that my explanations portray some kind of philosophy. But this is actually an assessment based on an experience that is ahead of you by a few thousand years. By the way, I don't think much about so-called philosophies anyway, especially when they originate from ignorant, atheistically minded people. Women's emancipation is a very important issue, because it changes women to such a degree that they lose sight of their actual assignation. You must be aware that the human body, the physical side of man, develops according to a spiritual model. The information, DNA, required for the construction of the body is guided by this invisible model, astral body. This, for you invisible spirit body, does not just consist of liquid spirit matter, but contains all the organs of the human body down to the minutest of cells. It doesn't matter whether some of the organs perform another function in the spirit world. The great planner created an unimaginable fauna and flora throughout the universe in order 40. To gain the experience from it that eventually led to the creation of man. All life is concentrated within him. Even the immortal spirit body is still subjected to constant improvements. Women's emancipation changes the physical body to such a degree that it no longer coincides with the spiritual model. But this can have dire consequences for the assignation of women. Once the genders forfeit their most prominent differences, they gradually lose their natural power of attraction. This is so unnatural that we find it hard to describe with your vocabulary. Once this power of attraction between man and woman has gone missing, any respect also disappears, and above all, sacred love disappears. What I am saying is that an emancipated woman is no longer adorable, lovable. Something one does not love becomes something indifferent in one's eyes. Maybe one or the other will realize just how important this observation really is. According to your laws, emancipation equates with the release from the custody of the father, respectively, parental control, ergo a release into an individual, unprotected existence. This formal conclusion is very important, because it actually finds full recognition here. By accepting emancipation as her right, a female voluntarily waives the protection and the responsibility of the male. She is left to her own devices. It therefore comes as no surprise that this does not work anywhere. In any case, it is certainly not according to God's will. This, however, does not mean that the female of the species is to be treated like an underaged child. But the male of the species should lift the arduous responsibility from her shoulders in regards to questions of survival. Most women these days regard emancipation as their release from their dependency on the male. This makes them relinquish certain natural rights that are far more precious and important than the freedom emancipation promises them. Well, this reaches a point where they lose their natural right to be intimately loved by their partner. What will be left, if the enormous differences between the sexes simply peters or completely disappears? The cessation of a woman's femininity condemns her to decadence. The woman, as the responsible bearer of human life, contains within herself the greatest creative secret of Mother Nature. Man always confronts a great secret with a certain amount of awe, but when this secret is dragged through the mud, this awe quickly turns into contempt. We, the Santinner, certainly regard it a great mistake when emancipation is forced. 41. Upon women, respectively when women strive for it willingly. The feminists have always found it an injustice when man stands above woman in regards to family laws and public standing. But the ensuing manumission made the moral and ethical bond between the sexes disengage. However, in order to compensate for this evil, most women set themselves beyond all past restrictions to satisfy their cravings and to satisfy their senses and the flesh with uncriticized abandon and also with a lack of restraint. Women's emancipation is in actual fact a bad joke, a step towards degenerateness. It would be far better if men were reminded of their duties in regards women. With the sternness of the law, man should have clearly explained that no woman is ever a slave, but a human being that deserves the highest respect and society's unconditional protection. Conscientia Infinitus 10. Man's infinite consciousness is the most important, most complicated, and most august that exists throughout the universe. This infinite consciousness is an actual part of God. Consciousness is a universal process of enormous proportions. The limitless speed of its thoughts already outshines everything else. For as long as the sciences on Terra have a completely false concept of what consciousness is, consciousness will be falsely informed and misguided. The resulting wrong conclusions lead to wrong actions. To add to this are the various races that categorically influence the way the people on Terra live together. The peaceful coexistence of nations cannot be guaranteed through terrestrial laws of a juristic nature. Consciousness sets itself above these guidelines without scruples. The divine rules and laws stemming from an imperceptible hierarchy are even less taken notice of. We, the Santinner, have also experienced such a crisis in the past and managed to overcome it. But this already happened many thousands of years ago. The reason for this negative behaviorism was the common ignorance about the consciousness's processes and above all, ungodliness, respectively ignorance in regards to crucial religious questions. This calamitous situation unfortunately still affects this Terra. We accept the fact that you are no longer able to emerge from this blind alley without outside help. We, the Santinner, have also waged severe wars against all and sundry, but as we have left all 10 infinite consciousness. 42. Of that behind us, we feel obliged to help you, because by helping you, we support the Creator. Consciousness can naturally break down, it can become ill or experience utter turmoil. Consciousness can also deteriorate into insanity. An insane person can come to the conclusion that everything he does is logical, correct, and accountable. But the sane person will insist that the opposite is correct. But what happens when the majority of the population on Earth falls prey to a general insanity? One that it does not recognize as such and therefore regards as correct and intelligent? And what happens when only a powerless, small minority recognizes this insanity for what it is, but is unable to do anything about it? This is how we, the sent-inners, see the general state of emergency this Terra is in. Those in responsible positions must at least be prepared to allow themselves to be helped, before this mental pestilence can be combated. I am perfectly aware that my elucidation in regards to this will not be received with a lot of enthusiasm. Many responsible people will not find these expositions very palatable, because their pride and arrogance is too prominent. How can one recognize